35 years from the implosion of the Soviet Union, there still are countries that are struggling to pull away from Russia's orbit. One example of that is a country in the South Caucasus. It's currently preparing for elections.
Putin really unnerved everyone when he said that if Armenia wants to pursue EU membership, it should heed the example of Ukraine.
One of the Kremlin's main propagandists, Vladimir Solovyov, did some further unnerving in his signature style, taking the threat up a notch.
Потеря Армении – гигантская проблема. Почему мы не можем начинать СВО?
Rhetoric that Armenia can't easily ignore.
Armenia is still very dependent on Russia economically and in many other ways, and Europe just can't replace that.
With parliamentary elections looming, the Prime Minister is trying to close the door on a bloody chapter.
Pashinyan understood that in order to secure the stability and peace in the Republic of Armenia, the price was to recognize Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan.
In this episode, we ask, will Armenia resist the pull of Moscow and realign its foreign policy? As pro-Western and pro-Russian forces gear up for a showdown, we explore the ideas, the pressures, and the political visions that could shape the country's future. I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig, and this is the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring, where we look at the world through the lens of its media, exploring the narratives, the propaganda, and the disinformation.
Радио Tehran. Мы не вторгались на территорию Украины.
Western countries are not the international community. That era has finished.
조중 두당 두 나라 최고 영도자 동지들께서는
You might have come across some notable sons and daughters of Armenia, from the composer Aram Khachaturian to the French singer Charles Aznavour to US celebrity Kim Kardashian. But can you pinpoint the country on the map? We have two Armenian guides to introduce it to us, Grigor Atanesian from BBC Russian in London and Gayane Alexanian from BBC Monitoring in Yerevan.
Armenia is a former Soviet republic in the South Caucasus, so it's roughly between Turkey, Russia, and Iran.
It sits right at the crossroads of Eastern Europe and Western Asia, a place where empires and cultures and religions have collided for thousands of years. Armenia is landlocked.
It's a fairly small place, but it has an outsized presence in the sort of global discourse. In Armenia case, you have give or take 3,000 years of written history and a statehood that dates back to the 2nd century BC. It was the first country to adopt Christianity as a state religion in the year 301.
Armenia has a population of around 3 million people, but the Armenian diaspora is significantly larger, generally estimated at around 7 to 10 million people.
And another crucial point.
There was a massacre of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire in 1915. Over 1 million people were killed. That's the trauma that formed the modern Armenian identity.
Former US President Joe Biden recognized the massacre as a genocide, as have many EU countries and Russia, while neighbors Turkey and Azerbaijan have not.
After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Armenia became independent. The economic collapse, factories were closed and energy shortages became severe, and many people left the country.
The implosion of the superpower gave rise to a conflict that still haunts Armenians and Azeris.
The conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh was a very curious case in which two principles of international law clashed with each other. One is a principle of territorial integrity and another principle of self-determination. So we're talking about a fairly small enclave with 150,000 predominantly Armenian population inside what was Soviet Azerbaijan. So when the Soviet Union was collapsing, Azerbaijan wanted, obviously, to keep all its territory. And then the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, they didn't want to be a part of independent Azerbaijan. Violence broke out, there were pogroms, there were clashes. Moscow lost control of that conflict. Tens of thousands of people died from both sides. There were over 1 million refugees combined and displaced people. There were two wars over Nagorno-Karabakh in the 1990s where Armenia was victorious and ended up controlling 7 districts of Azerbaijan. And that was the status quo for over 30 years.
But in the last few years, the tables turned.
Oil-rich Azerbaijan invested heavily in military, and in 2020, during the Second Karabakh War, they decisively won.
No final peace agreement was ever reached, leaving the conflict frozen and unresolved.
Azerbaijan's army was standing by, waiting for its moment.
And then in 2023, with Russia distracted with its invasion of Ukraine, they finished the business by taking the whole of Nagorno-Karabakh, and then almost every Armenian left for Armenia. The victimhood, the idea of Armenians being displaced, it's really sort of triggered that old trauma. Of course, Azerbaijanis were also displaced by the Armenians, but the nation only sort of remembers and focuses on its own traumas and pain. And so for generations, Armenian politics were just really centered around this.
But the current leader broke ranks and charted a radically different path.
Prime Minister Pashinyan wants to make peace with both Turkey and Azerbaijan. He is willing to let the Nagorno-Karabakh issue go and start from scratch in the internationally recognized borders of both republics, because he just feels so much potential was wasted around these conflicts.
So how has he been packaging this plan?
What Pashinyan suggests is the idea of real Armenia as opposed to the idea of historic Armenia, ancient statehood with territories which are now parts of different countries. He feels like the situation which Armenia finds itself in is due to this focus on history. He wants to move from history to real Armenia. Our focus is this republic.
Եվ այդ վիրտուալ խոսակցության մեջ պատմական Հայաստան ինձ ասում է մի գնացեք.
We don't want to think about history. We want to make this piece of land that is ours by international law. We want to make it prosperous. We want to make it a happy place, and we want to have no war. He wants to make peace with everybody in the region, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and for Armenia to become what he calls a crossroads of peace, for international trade routes to crisscross it, leveraging its geography.
It's hard to argue with the idea of peace and prosperity, but it has divided Armenians.
Obviously, for many, it feels like a terrible betrayal. So that's the defining battle of the Armenian politics.
Pashinyan made his name as an opposition activist and even spent time in jail.
Pashinyan came to power after this Velvet Revolution in Armenia. And then he understood that in order to secure the stability and peace in Armenia, the price was to recognize Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. The opposition is still saying that he just gave up the lands. And his current campaign is often framed as a referendum on peace and whether Armenia should continue its Western diversification path. Because opposition is pressing on continuing close cooperation with Russia. So Armenians, again, are divided. They still believe that church and religion are taboos and people cannot touch these identity values.
One symbol that carries a heavy load of identity value for Armenians is Mount Ararat, where, according to legend, Noah's Ark ran aground. But the redrawing of borders following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire meant that the mountain is across the border in Turkey.
Pashinyan is saying that Mount Ararat is not on Armenia's territory, and Armenia has another mountain which is called Aragat. People should now have the picture of Aragat instead of Ararat on their walls.
Indeed, Mount Ararat has already trialed its disappearing act on the new Armenian passports. The Prime Minister's idea is to decouple identity from a piece of soil that anchors Armenia to its trauma. And the same idea is applied to Nagorno-Karabakh. Daria Mosulova from BBC Monitoring's Russia team found out in the capital Yerevan how this real Armenia is viewed by those who were forced to leave Karabakh.
I came to the building in Yerevan that houses the representation of the Nagorno-Karabakh government. I was just inside speaking to the people that work there, all of them without a salary, because the administration had recently been entirely cut off of any government funding. And they tell me that nearly 100% of the refugees from the region will be voting either for Samuel Krapetyan or Robert Kochiryan. And this is because these are the people that are not willing to accept Nikol Pashinyan's vision for real Armenia, which they see as abandoning their right to ever be able to go home. A lot of them have lost friends or family members in the war, and no longer have access to places that mean a lot to them, like their churches or their homes. And some of them tell me they still keep the keys to in hopes of being able to go back.
The real Armenia is built by basically stopping the colonial dependence on Russia. He feels like the conflict with neighboring countries was due to the idea that Russia would protect Armenia. I think there was a lot of false expectations because in the 1990s, Russia very decisively intervened on the Armenian side. The end of the Karabakh conflict made this anti-Russian sentiment very, very widespread among wide parts of the Armenian population. And now the Prime Minister wants to decisively put it into policy that Armenia is not dependent on any one security guarantee, is peace with all neighbors. Russia is being really sidelined and pushed from the country where it had the strongest positions for over 100 years in the whole of region. Pashinyan says that everybody who votes for other parties will be voting for war and they will be voting for future dependence on Russia. It is a very obviously dangerous way to frame that peace agenda and geopolitical realignment tied to his candidacy. And there are a lot of issues with his record as Prime Minister, domestic, not just geopolitical.
So what's the general mood on the streets of Yerevan? Here's more from Daria.
I was just at a rally by Strong Armenia, a political party that has emerged as one of the main challengers in this election, and one that has been openly endorsed by Russia's president, Vladimir Putin. The latest polling puts the party in second place. They are still a long way behind Nikol Pashinyan's Civil Contract Party, but as things stand now, a lot of the votes are up for grabs. According to the most recent polls, about a third of respondents are still non-committed. And so the man vying for their attention is Samvel Karapetyan of Strong Armenia. I've been seeing his face plastered on campaign posters all across Yerevan. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister himself is touring the country. He's been very active on Instagram with nearly 1 million followers, and he's been posting videos riding buses or cycling around Yerevan, playing drums, and making what has become his signature sign, a heart shape with his hands, to designate peace.
So what's the opposition looking like?
I would say that they are fragmented, and it's not clear whether they will be together to form a coalition. The main forces are Armenia Bloc, led by former President Robert Kocharyan, Prosperous Armenia Party, which is led by Gagik Tsarukyan, and Strong Armenia Party, which is led by, again, pro-Russian Samvel Karapetyan, now under house arrest for his comments, which were interpreted by Pashinyan as attempts to seize power.
Karapetyan made his fortune in Russia and is now on the list of the top 50 richest people in the country, according to Forbes. His company, Tashir Group, is a commercial real estate empire that, among other things, owns a chain of shopping malls called Rio, which are quite ubiquitous all across Russia.
Samvel Karapetyan holds a Russian passport and Cyprus passport. He started the process of revoking those passports.
Under Armenian law, his dual citizenship precludes him from becoming even a parliamentary deputy in the country, let alone prime minister. But he is nevertheless clearly the horse that Putin is backing in this election.
Samvel Karapetyan wasn't political. His main role in Armenia was a benefactor and a sponsor of the Armenian Church.
The Apostolic Church is obviously not on the ballot, but it's very influential, and there's no doubt which horse it's not backing.
Armenia is quite a religious country, and so the opinions of the church will have quite some sway over public opinions.
It's polling above the army or the government or any other institution.
The church found itself in a salacious spat with the Prime Minister, who delivered some under-the-belt blows, including accusations of extramarital affairs and children out of wedlock.
The unprecedented attack of the Prime Minister against the church leadership is seen as an attempt to neutralize a powerful opponent, and it's a very dirty story, and it's really shocking in the way that many details of it are obscene. Basically, the Prime Minister says that the church leadership is corrupt and has to go. The church obviously denies all these accusations.
Pashinyan is saying that he's a religious person and he's visiting churches, he's attending liturgies and religious services. He's viewing the leadership of the church as pro-Russian elements.
The bigger picture is that the church is the sort of the heart and the brain center of that vision of historic Armenia. And of course, the prime minister, with his idea of real Armenia, probably sees the church as a driver of that counter-narrative, which he thinks is the root of all Armenia's problems today. And when prime minister came for the church, Karapetyan said that if the politicians will not defend the church, he will defend it. Based on that remark alone, he was detained, and he is now investigated by the prosecution as a sort of attempt to take power. Obviously, his defense denies it. Once he was detained, his nephew became its de facto leader. They're fairly pro-Russian, and they seem to have good graces of the Russian government.
Another contender is someone who is familiar with the corridors of power, former President Robert Kocharyan. For him, the issue of Karabakh is personal.
He himself came from Nagorno-Karabakh and was one of the de facto leaders of the armed groups. He had this legacy of a warlord. Robert Kocharyan was a neoliberal strong man, open to international capital, open to development, and the economy grew very rapidly under his rule. Some of it was just selling lots of Armenia's industry and lots of critical industry being controlled by Russia. But he also was the hawk in terms of Nagorno-Karabakh in relationship with Azerbaijan. After his second term ended, he joined the board of one of the biggest Russian investment companies.
Not surprisingly, the opposition has little appreciation for Pashinyan's Real Armenia project.
They are saying that our identity indicators, we should not just forget about them. Our religion, our language, our values, these monasteries and all that are all part of Armenian identity that they want to cherish. And
so they're more looking towards the past.
Yes, saying that leadership must change because a government that lost the war cannot negotiate from a position of strength and risks making further concessions. The opposition claims that Pashinyan has damaged relations with Russia, on which Armenia remains economically, strategically dependent. Also, the opposition argues that the justice system is not fully independent and saying that law enforcement institutions serve Pashinyan's interests.
You are listening to The Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring. Despite what looks like attempts to wage a campaign against critics, the media landscape seems to be in an enviable shape.
We have a new Reporters Without Borders survey, where Armenia ranks 50th out of the 180 countries in the World Press Freedom Index, down from 34th position. Media environment is diverse but highly polarized. Media are free to criticize the government and investigate its activities. Independent media rely heavily on grants and other forms of donor support because of the limited advertising market and other economic constraints. Radio is more for entertainment. TV and public TV also remains, but online media already outperforms TV.
What about freedom of speech?
The Constitution guarantees freedom of speech to individuals and media outlets. And while people are mostly free to express their views, there are regulations in place regarding defamation, hate speech, national security, public insults, especially involving public figures and officials to protect public order and individual rights.
How much influence does foreign media have?
Russian outlets. They have significant presence, and 3 Russian state TV networks are available via digital terrestrial TV, and one of them with national coverage on national multiplex. RTR is showing here, but if they make some statements that are against Pashinyan or are against national interests of Armenia, that means that they will send a note to Russia, they will block the channel.
So do you find if the people who are watching the Kremlin propagandists, do they agree with them?
No, not necessarily. And actually, people are more watching this Armenia TV, Shant TV. These are, of course, much more influential than Russian. But still, these Russian channels are present.
Russia's influence is not just audible on the airwaves.
It's definitely true that there has been somewhat of a shift when it comes to Russian influence in Armenia. For years, it was essentially uncontested because Russia acted as its main guarantor of security. The break came in 2020 when conflict broke out again over Karabakh and Moscow failed to intervene. Now, Armenia and Azerbaijan are in the process of signing a peace deal.
Ilham Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, even appeared via video link in an international gathering in Yerevan.
This is a clear indication that peace is a reality. We live in peace for only 9 months, and we are learning to live in peace.
And with peace in the region, Russia has a lot less leverage.
Yet, despite this new reality, there's an enduring legacy quirk. Russian boots are still on the ground in Armenia.
Russian border guards used to be in Armenian checkpoints and border points on the border with Iran, on the border with Turkey, at the Zvartnots International Airport.
Armenia hosts a Russian military base. But I think Russia's capacity to become militarily involved in yet another country at the moment is definitely questionable because it has been waging a war against Ukraine for over 4 years now. I don't know to what extent they would be able to rope in the army to hold Armenia down. Exerting their control in other ways might be a likelier option.
The idea to strong-arm Armenia onto the right path certainly crossed the minds of some prominent Kremlin people.
Yeah, some of the more incendiary rhetoric came from Russian propagandists on state TV.
Потеря Армении – гигантская проблема. Почему мы не можем начинать СВО из других?
So Vladimir Solovyov has called on the Kremlin to conduct a special military operation, which is the term that Russia uses for its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but in Armenia. It provoked a wave of outrage.
The French president got so worried that he called on the EU to help Armenia protect its borders without a Russian contingent.
Mais il y a quand même toujours 4000 soldats russes sur le territoire arménien, donc plus de 1000 gardes-frontières.
Yet Yerevan and Moscow keep meeting and talking.
In early April, Pashinyan came to Moscow and basically schooled Putin on how to run a democratic country. He sat opposite a sheepish-looking Russian president talking about how Armenia runs 2 municipal elections per year and how its internet has never known any censorship.
У нас социальные сети, например, на 100% свободны.
Putin put his demands to Armenia directly, which is that the country should pull back from the West and allow one specific candidate into the parliamentary race. Somewhat ominously, Putin said, "We have a great many friends living in Armenia."
Смогли принять участие в этой внутриполитической работе.
There are many political forces that are pro-Russian, and we would very much like for all these political parties to be able to take part. He added, "I know that some are currently in prison, even though they hold Russian passports." He didn't name any names, but it's clear that the person he was referring to was Samvel Krapetyan.
How did the Armenian press reflect on the meeting?
The meeting was widely described as tense and politically direct, and Armenian commentators viewed Putin's comments as warning that Armenia should allow pro-Russian forces to contest in the election and be prepared for high prices for gas if they are not allowed.
How is Pashinyan viewed in Moscow?
When Russian authorities talk about Pashinyan's campaign, they normally fit it into this narrative of power struggle between Moscow and the West. They use words like orbits and spheres of influence, which are all words that to anyone who has been observing the region for long enough are seriously triggering because we know what happens next. Putin really unnerved everyone at a press conference when he said that if Armenia wants to pursue EU membership, it can of course do so, but it should heed the example of Ukraine. And so we know that decoupling from Moscow never came easy.
In contrast to some of his propagandists, President Putin wrapped his ultimatum in a veil of amicable solution.
On the 9th of May, Putin went further, offering a soft, intelligent and mutually beneficial divorce with Russia in the case that Armenia decides to move closer with the EU rather than staying in the Moscow-led Eurasian Economic Union.
Basically, Putin has made it clear that if Armenia wants to pursue its EU ambitions, it would not be able to remain in the Eurasian Economic Union. And so it would have to make up its mind quickly.
It's a balancing act. They believe that they shouldn't put all eggs in one basket. Pashinyan believes that it's still okay to stay with the Eurasian Economic Union because we are not part of EU. Armenia has not even applied officially to become a member of the EU. And he's saying, I can't very much agree with the word of divorce because it's not like a marriage.
The way things stand at the moment, Armenia is still very deeply integrated into the Russian market. A huge number of Armenian businesses trade with Russia. A lot of Armenian nationals migrate to Russia for work. And perhaps most importantly, Armenia still imports the majority of its gas a lot cheaper than it would have if it had trade links with other countries.
Россия продает газ Армении 177,5.
So oil, gas and wheat weigh heavily in Russia's favor. But other big powers are coming up with tempting offers of their own, complicating the equation.
Russia is managing Armenian Railways, and Armenian Railways is part of Russian Railways. It's consortium. Armenia asked Russia to renovate and restore part of the railways, which now are needed for Armenia for the implementation of Trump's route.
You might remember President Trump talking up the number of conflicts he resolved as he eyed the Nobel Peace Prize. The peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan is listed among those achievements, even though he confused some countries' names.
We settled Azerbaijan and Albania as an example. It was going on for years.
There he was in the White House with the leaders of both countries to talk peace and trade routes.
They both said during the entire terms, all they did was kill people on the other side. And at the end of an hour, we were hugging each other. It was an amazing thing. And Cambodia and Armenia, and it was a bad one. Think of that.
And so TRIP was born.
President of the United States, the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, and the Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia will now sign the joint declaration on the outcomes of the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity Summit. Grand words for a grand project. But let's get real. We're talking about a 50-kilometer stretch in a place abandoned by time. Grigor went to the Iranian-Armenian border to see it for himself.
On paper, it should include a railway link, a new road, lots of infrastructure, internet cables, etc. So far, it will require millions and millions, maybe billions of dollars in investment because you don't have any infrastructure there left. Just going there makes you realize how far-fetched the whole TRIP idea is. The idea of American companies building a super modern infrastructure on that border because it's a really, really remote place. Even by Armenian standards, it's up in the mountains, the roads are terrible. Even Armenians are not doing much business there. There is large-scale Iranian influence because for Iran, it's a very important trade route. There is a new bridge being built. You can even see signs in Farsi. And of course, there is also Russian presence because Russian FSB border guards have been stationed on its border with Turkey and on its border with Iran. The Trump route used to be a Soviet railway connecting Armenia and Azerbaijan, and then it was completely destroyed in the 1990s during the conflict. It's now as this post-apocalyptic landscape. You have the station, which used to be very busy. Now it's abandoned and broken windows. There is a statue of a young woman without a hand. There is a broken head of a Soviet communist hero. It really looks like one of those video games about zombie apocalypse.
The rhetoric is doing some heavy lifting here, and the project might remain wishful thinking, pending on the outcome of the US war on Iran.
Armenia and Iran have historic ties, strong friendship, and it was one of the open borders of Armenia. Actually, Armenian officials, they were successful in explaining Iran that the TRIP will not act against them because opposition is saying that if they come to power, they will renegotiate and allow Russia to guarantee Armenia's security. But Pashinyan is saying that he is giving the territory for 99 years to USA. There is an impression that they're still waiting for Iran and the US tensions to calm down to understand who is losing the war. Because many commentators in Armenia said that if Iran wins, that will mean that TRIP will not be built in Armenia.
It's very hard to see it's being realized now when the United States and Iran are locked in the cycle of conflict. To sum it up, there's a lot of fanciful talk about corridors. There is not a lot of substance around it. We are talking about a landlocked country which was locked in the conflict for the last 35 years, which had close borders with two of its neighbors. The majority of its borders were basically closed for the most of its independent history. For it to be pitching itself as a place for corridors and routes, it's a very different narrative. You can reach Europe or you can reach Asia through us, and we are open to business.
TRIP would mean an American foothold in Russia's former backyard. Regardless of its current ideation stage, it signals a new direction. And there are some tangible moves to prop it up.
Armenia has been forging closer ties with countries elsewhere in the world as well. For example, we know that for a long time, Russia used to have a near monopoly on arms sales to Armenia. But in the years between 2022 and 2024, around 43% of Armenia's weapons actually came from India, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute.
At the same time, Russian presence is still palpable and tolerated, unlike in other countries for whom escaping the orbit was an existential question.
The majority of Armenians never perceived Russia really as a threat. For a long time, Armenians sort of conflated Turkey and Azerbaijan in their heads into one enemy. Now the situation is very different. Turkey now basically doesn't have any outstanding issues with Armenia, ready to normalize anytime. For Turkey, Armenia is a very small neighbor on its eastern border. For Azerbaijan, it matters, of course, because it was locked in this conflict for decades. Pashinyan already sort of fulfilled the majority of Azerbaijan's conditions, and both countries now have finalized the peace deal, which is only to be signed now.
But there is one hurdle to peace on paper, and this is why the elections matter.
Pashinyan is saying that he's already working on a new constitution, and the upcoming elections will also show the public support and approval of changing the constitution to remove all references to Nagorno-Karabakh.
In Baku's eyes, is a claim on its territory. Azerbaijan won't sign peace deal until that's done, and that won't be done until the election. And after the election, nobody yet knows how exactly Armenian government will go about changing the constitution.
You are listening to the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring. Moscow has vested interest here, and there are accusations of a Russian influence operation. But are they grounded in evidence?
Armenia actually asked for EU's assistance, and this rapid response team they are going to send to help Armenia to resist disinformation, to resist possible interference from Russia. I would say that's real, more real than fears.
How does it manifest itself?
Many pro-Russian bloggers on Telegram who are writing mainly in Russian, and actually Armenia's Telegram sphere is in Russian. They are promoting the idea that Armenia will be more weakened if they damage relations with Russia further. That would mean poverty for Armenia, that gas price will increase.
Narratives aside, there are signs of a disinformation campaign that seems to bear Moscow's fingerprints.
Armenian fact-checkers have observed that the number of deepfakes involving Pashinyan has surged since last year. For example, this organization called CivilNet has spotted false claims that Armenian authorities were torturing senior church figures or plotting to kill the head of the Armenian church. They traced these stories back to a Russian-linked organization called the Foundation to Battle Injustice, which is this unit that was set up by Yevgeny Prigozhin, a now deceased Russian warlord who used to run mercenaries from the infamous Wagner Group.
If you read the Western media's coverage of the Armenian elections, there are plenty of comparisons with the recent elections in Moldova, which were cast as a full-on Russian influence operation. How justified do you think are these comparisons?
I think the Armenian government absolutely wants this to be seen and covered in the Western media as the second Moldova. I think we just don't have facts supporting it. In Armenian case, it's a much more mixed picture. Despite all their pro-West rhetoric, they're desperate to also accommodate Kremlin, and actually under Pashinyan's government, Russian economic stake in Armenia increased. There is Russian propaganda, of course, and disinformation. It's been there forever. It's fairly low level and it's very ineffective because unlike Moldova, there isn't a large-scale pro-Russian sentiment now in Armenia after what's happened to Nagorno-Karabakh. Russia is fairly open about not being happy about Armenia's westward turn. But I think one can also ask about Western meddling into the Armenian election. The summit, foreign leaders come and embracing, basically endorsing the incumbent prime minister.
What President Trump and the prime minister have accomplished together is really visionary.
We earlier have seen United States Vice President J.D. Vance visiting Armenia and openly endorsing Prime Minister Pashinyan. There isn't terribly more that Russia is doing than, say, the West is doing in this election, to be fair.
What is the EU's role and how does that clash with the Russian agenda?
Europe, for over a decade now, invested and just donated lots of money helping agriculture, education, human rights, many industries. There is a lot of positive change sponsored by European institutions. The second level is geopolitical and grandiose, and it's this idea that Armenia for a long time was in Russia's sphere of influence and now it will somehow become the part of geopolitical West, and that was the rhetoric of this summit in Yerevan, European Union Armenia Summit, which took place this May.
Armenia has long been a valued member of our broader European family, and today I want to express our firm support and partnership with Armenia.
The summit in itself was conspicuous. A lot of it has been tabled as an attempt by the EU to prevent Russia's hybrid threats.
Armenia has also to counter foreign information manipulation.
They are also now supplying Armenia with arms, so there is quite a strengthening security and economic relationship.
There is a lot of vague rhetoric which can be misleading to the Armenian population because some of European leaders, they talk about Armenia joining Europe.
It is an opportunity to deepen our bonds and take our unique partnership to the next level.
Now, a lot of people in Armenia read that as, you can become a member state, which is absolutely not on the table, right? But that's not being spelled out.
There was another observation I thought was very striking. Pashinyan pushing for this geopolitical realignment with the West. But at the same time, he's not shying away from locking up opponents in a way that's not exactly aligned with Western democratic norms. What's your view on how he does that?
The geopolitical rhetoric of Pashinyan allowed him to behave in domestic politics in a way that is not really consistent with liberal democracy and still avoid any criticism. And we are talking about lengthy pre-trial detention of political opponents, even leading opposition members of parliament who are being arrested and investigated under very questionable charges, sometimes years before any trial starts. It's basically a trick for all post-Soviet countries. You lock them up while the case is ongoing, and a couple of years later you let them out and then you neutralize an opponent. That stuff still happens, and Europe doesn't say anything at all because it happens under the banner of fighting against Russian agents or Russian influence or strengthening democracy.
There may be silence from the West, yet there is plenty of disapproval at home.
They argue that his policies led to the loss of Armenian control over Karabakh, and he damaged relations with Russia without securing an equally strong alternative security framework with the West.
With just days to go, what are the polls saying?
Public opinion polls point to the fact that Pashinyan's party, Civil Contract, is very likely to win.
Main opposition groups could collectively outpoll Civil Contract, potentially giving the opposition a chance to form a coalition government. But they would need to combine their mandates to reach the threshold to form the government. But none of the opposition forces said that they will join.
What challenges would a Pashinyan victory bring?
If Pashinyan does win again, Russia will almost certainly still find ways to work with him. The language now is harsh, but Armenia still matters to Moscow, so they will find ways to repair the relationship and keep their foothold however they can in the country.
And it still has to rebuild public trust in state institutions after years of war trauma and deep political polarization, which is still in place.
It will be 8 years as prime minister. He presided over a complete defeat in the war against Azerbaijan. He had many internal crises, but he survived. He was politically, domestically, and geopolitically balancing between Russia and the West. I think the question is whether he tones it down or whether he escalates, really breaks with Russia, really cracks down on the opponent, and whether that will jeopardize everything that he has achieved.
This election is not just the choice between Russia and the West. More importantly, it's a test of Armenia's ability to resist the call of history and set a new political trajectory. Thank you for listening to this edition of the Global Jigsaw from all of us, contributors Daria Mosolova, Grigor Atanisyan, and Gayane Alexanyan, as well as exec producer Krista Shaturi and me, Krasi Ivanova-Twig. And if you want to find out more about BBC Monitoring, you can do so by visiting our website monitoring.bbc.co.uk.